Hey guys, thanks for tuning in. This is Handgunner 945 here. We're going to talk today about rechambering rounds and what can happen if you do that. So for demonstration purposes, I've got a Glock 19 Gen 4. These are all unloaded and have been checked for safety. I have a Beretta 92A1, and we also have a Glock 34 Gen 4 field stripped. So basically what we're talking about is if you had a round that you chambered, that you loaded, and then you unloaded it for whatever reason, and then reloaded, rechambered that same round multiple times, what would happen to the bullet? And basically, the primer for all of this is the fact that when you load, when the slide moves forward to load a bullet into the chamber, it does so with a great amount of force. And just to kind of illustrate that, this is a Glock 19. I'm just going to hit this slide stop here and let you guys kind of see how much force is involved as the slide moves forward. Okay? And the reason for that is if the slide is dirty, if the magazine, the ammunition is dirty, it can still have enough force to work that bullet up in it, up into the chamber. Okay, and it has to do that to be reliable. So different manufacturer, same concept here. This is with the Beretta. I'm just going to kind of release a slide stop here and just look at how much force is involved in moving the slide forward, which would be chambering around. Okay. So what that can cause, and basically the reason for that, as the bullet moves up in there, goes into the chamber, it is indexing on the rim of the case. So get a nice close-up here of this case. And that little ledge that you see, the rim, the edge of the casing, as it meets the bullet, that small little ledge is what it's resting on inside the chamber. So there's another ledge in the chamber that rests on. And you guys see the force that goes in there with. So a few times probably won't do a lot of damage. But over time, that amount of force repeatedly could cause some ill effects to your rounds. The first one, and this is the one that everyone kind of talks about, it's what they call bullet setback. And bullet setback happens when the bullet starts moving inside the casing. It loses its seal or its crimp, and it starts moving inside the casing. Bullet setback obviously would be if this bullet went further down into the case. Okay, started moving down into the case. The problem with that would be that the chamber volume inside this casing would start becoming reduced. And that's where your powder is, obviously. And it's got to be a very specific volume. If it's not a specific volume, you start having reliability issues, but more importantly, you start building up too much pressure, excess pressure. So if that happens, you can blow the primer out of the back here, or the overpressure could split the case, and you could have an explosion out of the back of your case. And when that happens, you have what they call a kaboom, which I'm sure you've seen on the internet. And basically the explosion coming out of the back of your barrel, your chamber here, blow the magazine out of your gun, maybe blow the slide off. More than likely it's going to split this polymer handle and possibly send shards of it into your hand because of where your hand is going to be when that happens. So that's obviously a pretty grave danger. The good thing is I haven't seen or heard of it happening too often. Typically kabooms are caused by, too much, maybe a double charge, something like that happening. But bullet setback, especially with store-bought, with manufactured ammunition, defensive ammunition like this, which is manufactured to a higher standard, typically unheard of. And there are a couple reasons for that. First off, on this one, you're going to see, and I'll show you on the 45 model as well, there's a little crimp around the bullet itself, a little ring around it. And that ring serves to keep it firmly in place. So it's not going to move back or forward and just kind of stay stationary in the bullet casing itself. So on the 45, you can really see it. And it's just kind of a little knurled ring around the edge there that kind of holds it firmly in place, keeps it from shifting forward or back. On some other manufacturers, you're going to see a crimp in the middle of the case, and that also keeps the bullet from traveling down too far. It won't let it go past the crimp in the case. So that's also kind of a safeguard for bullet setback if you rechamber the same round a few times. So another drawback could be this round's been chambered a few times, and you can kind of see we're getting some gouges in it. It's got some spots in there, and that's basically because as it goes up the feed ramp to go into the chamber, a lot of force working on it, and it just starts to get deformed. So you can kind of mess your bullets up. You might have some feeding issues over time if you repeatedly chamber the same round. Both of those really, they're issues, but you can see if they happen. You can see if your bullet kind of starts moving in there. You'll notice, okay, hey, this is starting to look like maybe a shorter round than it should be. Or at least you have the option. You have the opportunity to kind of look and see that. Obviously, if your bullet starts getting chewed up at the end there, you can see, hey, I'm having feeding issues. This probably shouldn't be chambering this round anymore. But what I found, there's a bigger danger in rechambering the same round. And basically, it lies in this little part here at the back of the bullet, which is known as the primer. Okay? And the primer, obviously, its reason is to initiate the explosion in the case. It's to send the round off, or to start sending the round off. What happens if you chamber and rechamber the same round over and over again? The primer in the back has an explosive charge, obviously, an explosive compound in it, and it starts separating from the back. It starts getting pulled away from the back here, and it gets pulled away from what they call the anvil inside. And it can cause a condition where your firing pin will hit the primer, but nothing happens. The primer won't detonate, won't go off. Okay, so I've got this kind of kindergarten drawing here to illustrate what I'm talking about. But inside these primers, you have an anvil, which is what you see in this one here. We can get zoomed in maybe a little bit better. The anvil there is that brass piece, that kind of three-pronged brass piece. The green you see down in there would be the compound, or maybe there's a vapor barrier. On a lot of these, there's a vapor barrier between the compound and the anvil. And that's to basically keep any moisture out, to keep it sealed in there. And the cup would be the actual metal part, the steel part here. The whole thing, sits in. It looks like a cup, so it's pretty evident. All right, so that would be the back. That would be the part where your firing pin hits, and obviously this would be the part that's toward the casing. So what can happen is the compound in here gets separated, broken up, or whatever from the velocity of that slamming forward into the bolt or into the chamber repeatedly. Okay? And as those little pieces of compound get pulled away, or they get pulled out from underneath the anvil, when the firing pin hits, there is no explosive compound there to ignite. There's nothing to be worked upon by that energy. And so it doesn't detonate. I'll at the bottom of this video here, I'll include an incident where this happened to an officer in Georgia. He unloaded the same round, loaded and unloaded the same round multiple times, and he had this condition happen. It was not with Hornaday Critical Defense. It was with, I believe, either Winchester or Remington. But the primer failed from repeated chamberings. I had a friend who got a hold of me and said, hey, I had some carry ammunition. I've been carrying around a long time. I had one round that got chambered quite a few times. Loaded up in my H&K USP, and when I pulled the trigger, the primer was struck. Nothing happened. So I tried it 3 more times. Nothing happened. Every time, I looked at the primer and I could see the dent being made. The primer was making a good connection. It wasn't a light strike, but the primer just wasn't igniting. And you basically know when the primer doesn't ignite, because even if this is an empty case, if there's nothing in here, let's say it's a Monday when they made these rounds and they just didn't put any gunpowder in there, which is really unlikely in today's manufacturing industry, because these have cameras and sensors all over them to make sure that they're manufactured correctly. But let's just say it did. Let's say it shipped from the factory with no gunpowder in there. When this percussion cap is hit, it will have enough pressure, enough force to push the bullet out. Now, it may only go, just into the barrel here, out of the chamber. It may just barely start in there, but it will still push the bullet out even without any gunpowder. So we knew right away that there's an issue with the primer itself. Okay, maybe it's a bad primer, but the fact that it was loaded repeatedly kind of makes me think it's a similar situation to what the officer in Georgia ran into with the primer becoming inert, just basically from chambering and rechambering it. So after talking to him, he had loaded he chambered this particular round anywhere from 50 to 70 times, which is obviously probably excessive. But over time, these rounds were 3 or 4 years old, he said. Every other one except the one that was chambered repeatedly fired just as it should. But that one round that was fed in there, primer just failed on it, would not work. So I kind of did some research into this. The initial article, I found that. I haven't found a whole lot of other examples out there, people saying it's happened to them. I have seen a few people saying, hey, I'm not buying into this. I don't think a primer could fail that way. But I'm not a ballistician. I don't work in a lab. I don't make this ammunition. But from all the symptoms, it sure sounds like repeated chambering has made a primer inert. And these primers can sit for years on shelves and still be used. So it leads me to believe that the kinetic energy, that repeated force being applied to it, just kind of can make them inert over time. So just kind of something to watch out for. If you've had a similar situation, or if you've known of something like that happen, feel free to comment on it. But, what can we learn from this? Well, you guys probably already know the answer to this. If you're going to put your life on what you're carrying in your gun, you should probably make sure it's fresh. And, I always checked what was in my weapon before. I'd always cycle rounds out, and now I'll probably do it with a little more care and keep a little closer eye on it. Bullet pushback or bullet setback would be an issue, but the big thing here is if the primer fails, there's no way visually to know. So you'd look at the round, it would look perfectly good. It would look just like this. You would have no idea that the primer had separated, or that it was not ready to fire when you pulled the trigger. So just kind of something to watch out for. I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think. Leave your comments below. Happy shooting. Handgunner 945.